very powerful organization. There's nobody written a book about it. So I found a little book at the Library of Congress called The Drug Trust by a man named Morris Beale. And he was a Washington news reporter whose wife had had some minor ailment, and she went to the doctors, and she was so mistreated that it made her husband furious. And so he started looking at the medical profession, and he was appalled by what he found out. So he started studying the medical profession, and he wrote a little book about 20 pages long called The Drug Trust. And on the first page of this book, he said that he had found out that every drug manufacturer in the United States was controlled by John D. Rockefeller. Well, I thought that was a very foolish statement. I couldn't believe that. And so I just decided to do a little more research and show that he kind of exaggerated. I wasn't calling him a liar, but I actually didn't think he had his facts right. So as I looked into it, I found out that indeed every drug company in the United States was controlled by the Rockefellers, because it was very obvious on the list of directors of every major drug company in the United States were people from Standard Oil and from Chase Manhattan Bank and from other Rockefeller companies. So it was right there in front of me. There was no arguing about it. John D. Rockefeller.
So the man was right.
The man was actually right. Well, he was a newspaper reporter, and so he knew what he was talking about, but I just simply could not absorb that, because I knew that John D. Rockefeller was the owner of Standard Oil in New Jersey, the greatest monopoly in the world. And in my naivete, I'm a very country boy, I'm very naive, and I thought, if this is the richest man in the world, and he has the greatest corporation in the world, what does he want to fool around with the medical profession for?
Yeah.
Because that wasn't a very highly paid profession in those days, but it was part of the control. And he saw new worlds to conquer, and he took over the entire medical profession in the United States. He started some of his hirelings, he had three brothers working for him named Flexner, Abraham and Bernard and Richard Flexner. And Abraham Flexner was one of his lieutenants, and he commissioned him to make a study of the entire medical profession. And so Abraham worked on it about 8 months, and he came back with a study recommending the revamping of the entire medical profession. At that time, most Americans either went to allopathic physicians or naturopathic physicians, homeopathic physicians. Homeopathic and naturopathic. That was the medicine of the United States. It depended mostly on organic substances and natural substances. They worked very well. The Americans at that time were the healthiest people in the world. And they were so vigorous that you can't believe it, because there were no automobiles, and most Americans did not have horses and carriages, and they had to walk everywhere. And so,
Plus they were hard workers too.
They were hard workers. They worked very hard. They walked 25 miles a day. And they were in very good shape. And that's what they should be doing today. So anyway, Abraham Flexner submitted his report to Rockefeller, and he agreed with it and told him to go ahead with it. And so at that time, Rockefeller was the most hated man in the United States, and he was trying to set up a Rockefeller Foundation. But he was so hated that Congress refused to, even with wholesale bribing, they refused to authorize the Rockefeller Foundation. So he thought it was more clever, because at that time J.P. Morgan had set up U.S. Steel Corporation, which was an amalgamation of the Carnegie interests and other steel companies, and created a world steel monopoly, just like the oil monopoly. And so, you see, Carnegie was a little Scotchman who became a very wealthy man through the coal operation and the manufacture of steel. And he became one of the richest men in the world. And as he grew older, he devoted his life to charity. He set up libraries all over the United States. He was really a very good man. And he was a virtuous man, which Scotch people are. They're thrifty and they're very virtuous. So, because I'm Scotch myself, my mother was a muse, and from Scotland. So anyway, as a virtuous man, Carnegie wanted to give away his money. He didn't want anything to do with it, or he didn't want to manage it or dictate how it was used. And so when he set up the 5 Carnegie Foundations, he specified that he would have no personal interest in the operation of any of them. So he had 5 huge foundations to indulge in philanthropy, and he himself would have nothing to do with it. And so when Rockefeller learned about these 5 foundations, he made a rush in and put people in charge of them, and they became Rockefeller Foundations. And so
with Carnegie's money.
With Carnegie's money. And and Carnegie thought he was being very virtuous, and these millions of dollars being spent for philanthropic use. But Rockefeller had a different opinion. He thought that philanthropy should serve his business interests, and so all Rockefeller philanthropies became part of the Rockefeller business empire. He thought this was just good business. It worked out pretty well because all the Rockefeller philanthropies helped the Rockefeller business interests. And so Rockefeller took over the Carnegie revamping of the medical profession, and they issued a report in 1913, the same time that they adopted the Federal Reserve Act, that that the number of doctors in the entire United States be cut by about 2/3, and they adopt a whole new system called the allopathic system of medicine from Germany.
Which is drugs.
Well, drugs.
Artificial.
Well, the allopathic German system depended on radical surgery and long hospital stays and heavy use of drugs. And so this Rockefeller thought this was terrific. And so they've been on it. They've been on allopathic system ever since. Almost overnight, neuropathy and homeopathy disappeared in the United States. In fact, they practically became illegal.
Yeah.
Because as the legislatures under Rockefeller's leadership, he set up the American League of Municipalities, which controlled all the small towns in the United States, and the American Association of State Governments, which controlled all the state governments in the United States, including the legislatures. And he used the state legislatures to draft new methods for controlling doctors in hospitals. And so all hospitals and all doctors had to be licensed through state legislature, which sounded wonderful if you didn't know what was going on. That you had to go through John D. Rockefeller to get a medical license and a hospital license.
Wow.
That's what it amounted to. And that's the system we have today. And today we've become the sickest nation in the world and the most expensive medical care in the world, except you never get well. Which seems to work out for everybody except the patients.
Works good for the doctors, doesn't it?
Good for the doctors. It's
Drug
good for
companies.
Oh, yeah. So everybody's happy except the poor patients. And whenever you go to a doctor today and he prescribes a medicine for you, he says, you're going to have to take this medication for the rest of your life because it's against AMA principles to ever cure anybody. They've actually brought doctors up on charges of curing people. And they've drummed some of them out of the AMA for that very reason, because you're curing people. Because this might be the right thing to do, but from a business standpoint, it's better to keep them sick and keep them buying the medicine, which they buy from the Rockefeller drug companies, and go to the Rockefeller hospitals, and everybody's happy.
And now they have the scam where if you can't afford it, the government's going to buy the drugs from the Rockefellers and give it to you, right?
Well, that's why they had the Medicare system, because they developed Medicare. You know, I point out in my book, Murder by Injection, that for many years the AMA spent millions of dollars in Congress to fight Medicare because it was called government medicine, and they didn't want, the doctors were very independent, and they didn't want the government to control their business. Well, they wound up as employees of the government, and that's what happened.
And now this new drug act, they're going to supply the drugs to the people that can't afford it with the taxpayers' money, but the drug companies will still get the money.
They get the money.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people who are buying drugs today and medications, like elderly people like myself, they couldn't afford the drugs, and so the government will pay for them.
What a racket.
Well, it shows that these people are good businessmen.
Oh, very good. Yeah. They're not very ethical, though, are they?
Well, you and I could never think of such a diabolical plan.